Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, As We Live and Breathe, the breath as active ingredient in yoga therapy, happened on July 19th, 2022 as a science and spirituality dialogue with Laura Schmalzl, Singh Khalsa, Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and host Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series, Bring Body, Speech, and Mind to Life. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome everyone to Cyber Sangha with so beautiful new mantra rearranged by Danny Ramos in Torreon. So thank you. As we put these dialogues together, there's a lot of people to thank. So I want to start with that. Helen, Coleman, Polly, Milos, always in the tech, and in the chat, what you will see, Mariela. So thank you, everyone. And I know there's more people behind it. So we always do this in Cyber Sangha. Cyber Sangha was started by Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and we're glad to have you here always, Rinpoche. And as many of you know, he is a well-known teacher with centers in 35 centers all over the world, different countries that love to see him both in person now again, but through Cyber Sangha, being able to do that, and even before the pandemic. And so through these, he reaches many people that sometimes cannot see him in person. And we do a series of things. We do every full moon, we do 24 hours of practice, and we rotate throughout the world. And then Rinpoche does some teachings, and then we do these dialogues. And the teachings and dialogues and the 24-hour full moon, where each month we rotate between body, breath, and mind. So this is the month of breath. As Rinpoche would say, we're always breathing, but this is the month that we're focusing more our attention on breath. And so the dialogue today, we called it As We Live and Breathe, the breath as an active ingredient in yoga therapy. And we have two fantastic speakers. We've had them before, and I'm so glad that you're here again. Laura, who's just coming back from Costa Rica, Sadbir, who's in London. So, you know, one of the things about doing these online is that it allows us to be wherever we are and be together. So let me do a brief introduction of each one and then get them into the dialogue. So Laura Schmalzl is a clinical neuropsychologist, cognitive neuroscientist, as well as longtime yoga practitioner and certified yoga instructor. She was actually born in Italy, and that's where she studied at University of Padua, and then she went into a master's of clinical neuropsychology, and then a postdoc in Sydney, Australia, and then continue with her postdoctoral training in the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. Then she moved to the US, and she based in San Diego and taught at Southern California University Health Sciences. And she's been really interested in this science and yoga and how the research can see what is the benefits of yoga. And she has been the co-editor in chief of the International Journal of Yoga Therapy. And she's also contemplative faculty with the Mind and Life Institute. She's now moved to Santa Barbara, and she's completing her yoga therapy certification. Laura, welcome to our dialogue. And joining Laura, we have Sadbir and Sadbir Singh Khalsa. is the director of yoga research for the Yoga Alliance and the Kundalini Research Institute. He's a research associate at the Benson Henry Institute of Mind Body Medicine, a research affiliate of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine, and an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He has conducted, again, also research in yoga and yoga therapy since 2001, has been a practitioner and instructor in the Kundalini yoga since the early 70s. His research has evaluated yoga interventions for insomnia, chronic stress, anxiety-related disorders, including in workplace and public school settings. He works with the International Association of Yoga Therapists to promote yoga research as scientific director for the annual Symposium of Yoga Research and is the editor-in-chief for the International Yoga Journal of Yoga Therapy. So they work together with Laura. He's also the editor of An Introduction to Yoga and the chief editor of the medical textbook, The Principles and Practices of Yoga in Healthcare, where I'm happy to have a chapter co-written there. So welcome, both of you. It's so good to have you. And, I wish we could be in person, and maybe in Costa Rica, but this will be for now. So I like to start always with a little bit of personal introduction. Kind of, you both have such an interesting life. What led you to where you are in terms of practitioner and scientist? So women's first. So I'll start with Laura.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, Ale, and everybody. Very honored and happy to be here with you all. Well, how to make a long story short. As you said, I was born and raised in Italy, where I first studied psychology, and then moved to Australia, where I studied neuropsychology and did my PhD in cognitive science and then cognitive neuroscience. And that was the time in my early 20s where I really started with my own personal regular daily yoga practice. And the one thing that happened for me, it's just such a, I guess, a clear experience of so many things that I was learning in the neuropsychology and neuroscience realm became experiential evident to me when I was doing my yoga practice. And so to me, the study of neuroscience and the study of yoga became sort of just two pathways of looking at the same kind of concepts, at the same kind of issues, trying to understand them just from different viewpoints. And that then led to relatively long pursuit of trying to bring them together, like bring my yoga and my academic world together. And it took a while, but the Mind and Life Institute that you also mentioned was really instrumental at that. One of the first times I attended the Summer Research Institute. It's really where I met a lot of people with a similar kind of pursuits, whether they came from a meditation or mindfulness background or yoga background, really with the strong desire of bringing their academic world and their practitioner life together. And that's how I ended up then at University of California, San Diego, as a postdoctoral researcher. And that was really my first time where I was actively conducting yoga research. I was hired on a grant that was actually received through the VA. I worked with Dr. Eric Gressel, who some of your listeners might be familiar with, who's a yoga researcher based at UCSD. And so we did research with veterans that was specifically targeted toward chronic low back pain, but then we also did research with older adult population, student population, looking at various aspects of yoga's effect on, physical health, psychological parameters, stress parameters, etc. And it was particularly the research work with the students that got me really interested in bringing more yoga to student populations, just observing their changes, over and above the changes that we could measure in the actual studies that we did, but just actually seeing how much even subtle changes, but how much changes they were exhibiting, and they were reporting also on a qualitative level, how they would benefit from the practice during their, very stressful and active student lives. And so when I then moved on to a teaching position in Southern California, University of Health Sciences, I had the opportunity to introduce yoga as a sort of very active part of the neuroscience curriculum. So within the neuroscience class, we had a neuroscience lab where once a week, my department chair allowed me to experiment. And so we literally had the students practice an hour of yoga once a week. And then we were able to link what they were learning in the neuroscience curriculum to what they experienced in the yoga practice, and vice versa. And that I was really fortunate to be able to do that. And I think it was such a powerful way of not having the yoga practice being something extracurricular that they would do on the side, but really having it be an integral part of how to learn. And so I was there for 3 years, and then many things happened in my life and globally. And long story short, I was now in the US for a long time, and so I applied for my green card. That took 2 years to be approved. So it meant I had a gap of 2 years where I had no work authorization. And then the pandemic hit on top of that. So all that said, I was here, I couldn't move, I couldn't work. I'm like, well, this is the time to do my yoga therapy training that I've always wanted to do. And, it was kind of like a perfect, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. I'm like, perfect, I now have this time. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 2 or 3 years, primarily really focusing on my clinical yoga therapy work. I'm almost done with my certification. I'm in the final phases of my practicum. And so I have taken a little break from academia, and I'm, very open to go back. I'm really enjoy the teaching aspect primarily. But that's sort of been my journey. And yes, as you said, along the way, I also had the honor and opportunity to work with Satbir together in editing the International Journal of Yoga Therapy, which was also one of the aspects that definitely increased my interest in actually being able to do more clinical yoga therapy work. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. I do remember actually meeting you in the train going to Garrison for Mind and Life many years ago in an SRI. So great to have you here. Sadbi, a similar question. So what led you to the path that you're in now?
So I began in my early 20s, in the early 70s, as part of what was then a very robust counterculture movement. And a lot of us at that time were experiencing these deeper states and asking questions about, life purpose and meaning. And in the process of those experiences and that inquiry, I began reading and about contemplative practices and how they were achieved and what they were all about. And that led me to yoga as a practical method for working in that direction. And so I decided to practice yoga, and I was at the University of Toronto at the time as an undergraduate, and happened to find out that remarkably there was a course on campus for credit that was involving yoga practice. And so that's where I began. And then a few years later, I basically moved into the yoga ashram community for Kundalini yoga in Toronto, and became part of that. And so yoga was then fully and completely a lifestyle as part of an ashram community. And then in the mid-70s, my interest in science was still there. And at that point in time, I decided that I wanted to do research on these practices to identify what it was about these practices that could achieve these contemplative states. And so I went back and got my PhD in neuroscience at the University of Toronto in conventional science field, because there was no way to do research in contemplative practices at that time. And then when I finished in 85, I thought, well, now I could do a postdoc in contemplative practices. Unfortunately, nobody was there to be a mentor, and even Herbert Benson was not taking anybody that could not cover their own expenses by being an MD. So I just went on to another field. And then finally, in 2000, NIH founded the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, and I applied early. And I was fortunate enough to get a Research Career Award, which was a 5-year salary coverage, which was really fantastic. And that really got me started. So since that time, I've been doing research pretty much full time, and sort of 3 aspects to my career. One is actually conducting trials. So, the first thing I was doing was yoga for insomnia, because I was in a division, and still am in a division of sleep medicine, but then broadened that to a variety of different studies and clinical trials, and made a number of different collaborations that led to different aspects of studying anxiety and studying yoga in schools and studying yoga in the workplace, in collaboration with organizations like the Kripalu Yoga Center. So that's been where I've had the research side. But the other 2 aspects of my career is that I jumped whole hog into this whole field of yoga research and attended all the yoga research conferences in India and developed friendships and collaborations, and started promoting research on yoga through the Symposium on Yoga Research, through my interaction with the International Association of Yoga Therapists, working on the journal, and then also now more recently doing more education, what we call research literacy through the Yoga Alliance. And my role there is to really teach yoga teachers and practitioners about the science behind how yoga works, so that they have the language to be able to represent yoga in society. And so that's sort of a 3-pronged approach in my career, has been actual research, and then education, and then policy and promotion of yoga research. And right now, as I'm getting older, I'm stepping back from being a principal investigator, which means I don't have a staff, I don't have an office, but I'm still involved as a sort of co-investigator. So I've dropped all the stuff I don't like and continue with the research, and then actually intensifying the education and the lecturing and the attending conferences, which is really rewarding. So that's my story.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sadbir. And I think if I remember well, when you got that grant, it was actually not NCI, but NCOM at that time.
It was
right?
NCOM,
It was still called,
yeah.
It was still the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, that luckily they changed the name to Integrative Health. But yeah, thank you for that story. Yeah, Rinpoche.
Yeah, so before Alex, you go into the practice part, I just one quick question for both of you. Is because both of your background seems like in starting interest in yoga in your 20s, and then kind of went back as an academic and practice put together. And generally speaking, if you're a Buddhist, you are not able to do a good research on a Buddhist practitioner. It's hard. It's at least in America, is a little different than Europe, but Europe kind of strict about your believing in something and doing research, and in that field is one is very subjective and one is more objective results you're trying to find. So I'm wondering, even though US is a little bit different and open here, university, where you're able to do a yoga and so on. So just curious about if there's any moment, the conflict of, as Sadhvir said, now I'm tired of doing this research, and now you will not get tired of practicing it. So you see, there is something there. So just curious about it. Just a short answer, yeah.
Yeah, the funding is difficult to get in this area, and so it's always been a struggle to to keep myself funded, to keep my lab funded, to keep my salary going so that I can keep my research going. But now, I'm free of that, which is great. And that is the publish and perish negative aspect of academia. And I think it's actually worse for those of us in the fields of integrative medicine, because we're working with grant applications where conventional scientists review our grant applications. And, I think they're generally less familiar with and less open to these integrative medicine modalities. So that's been a challenge. In terms of the bias, it's true. I mean, most of the yoga researchers have come to yoga research because they're yoga practitioners. Nobody's coming to yoga because it's a strange thing. It's difficult to conduct research in this area. especially from the funding aspect. And I think the bias issue, although it is apparent that, he's a yogi practitioner, obviously he's going to bias his research. I think you eliminate bias with competent research design. And in fact, every scientist is biased towards a certain outcome. You want to have success on your hypothesis, because if you don't have a success in your hypothesis, you won't be able to get the next grant to continue your career. So every scientist, by definition, is biased, and you eliminate that bias with good research design. And so that's the way I think of it.
Thank you, Sadhbir. Laura, did you want to add to that?
No, just concurring with what Sadhbir just said. The research design is definitely key there. So, for example, if you are a yoga practitioner, yoga instructor, and design a research study, you should, have always another person, another instructor teaching the intervention. That's just one of many examples. Just so ways around where you're not the one who goes in with the idea of what should work, and then are the one teaching it in a certain way. And but again, one of many examples of there's ways around where studies can be kept as objective as possible. And in regards to the personal conflict, of course it has not always been easy for me personally. I think oftentimes people who really pursue this kind of career in yoga or other contemplative practices, they're drawn to the practices first and foremost, and then they seek out academia as a way of studying it or getting there. Whereas other people might really be interested in being academics and then choose kind of, the topic that fits that career. And so I found myself oftentimes just really wanting to have more yoga in my life, and then trying to bring it into my academic life, and then still having the same struggles of an academic, as Sadhbir just said, in terms of having to publish or trying to get grants and all of that. And now doing it in the name of the practice that I love so much oftentimes created conflict, for sure. It wasn't always easy. And always finding that balance, and trying to, not have the joy of the practice being tainted by the stress of the academic life in many ways.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we see that in academia also. Actually, for even in the humanities, when you see people studying a specific religion, that it's for example, Buddhism or Hinduism, and they are practitioners, they're told not to be there, not to mention that. And actually, it was only I think it was 2001, that the American Academy of Religion, they did a panel, and it was called Coming Out of the Closet, meaning that you could say, yes, I am a Buddhist practitioner and I am a Buddhist teacher, So it's been interesting. So that bias, Rinpoche, yes, I think it's been there. So I was going to go into the research, but before going there, Rinpoche, I wanted to ask you, I was thinking, we talk about breath being so important, and you've, with your extensive training, how have you found as you're teaching in the West, like, I see in the 30 years I know you, that you're really focusing on simple things to bring from but something that people can do and do it now. Do you want to tell us a little more about that approach of using breath in that particular way?
Yeah. So personally, again, it's always a little bit challenging. I think on one hand, I see these scripts, ancient scripts, and so much depth and knowledge, the details, so much there. And you're trying to kind of deal with them also, right? So you're trying to read them, understand them better every time, trying to teach them, trying to practice them. So you're dealing with that part, which is, sometimes you see people, you have like 1,000-page yoga instructions, but who does them? People even who wrote them, they don't do that. So it's like but you're trying to preserve them in order you wanted to have them there in case, preserving your knowledge. As any time when you're coming from indigenous tradition, we feel that we have a responsibility to, even though you don't practice everything, but you have responsibility to make sure they're published, they're kept there, they're translated in this as much as possible. But in everyday life, as a teacher, as a practitioner, you do come down to a, very simple thing. It's not, you don't deal with all this complexity of the text, but you do come down to like a breathing. Breathing, we will never not breathe. But the question is how well you breathe. It's always a question. And very often I realize also myself, I definitely need more improvement every day where I breathe. And even though all the idea of knowledge is so much curiosity and learning there, but every day breathing, every moment breathing, awareness of the breath and the level of the breath, the depth of the breath, the quality of the breath, the energy around the breath, the psychological or spiritual element of the breath, they're all so much needed to be pay attention in a very, very simple way. And so as a teacher, I always come down to coming down to, as far as the practice is concerned, I realize at the end of the day, practice is something that people got to do, not people got to learn and think. And there are people, they just wanted to learn and not do. But those people, I don't necessarily consider as really a practitioner. Not very interested even engaging with those kind of people. But I'm more interested also in the people who actually interested in doing something and experiencing something, actual real transformation in life, So that's my feeling.
Thank you, Rinpoche. So with that in mind, as we move to talk a little bit about research and mechanisms, I wanted both of you, Laura and Sadbir, to maybe ask you something that we will do a little different this time. So, you could talk a little bit about some of your personal research, and then maybe lead us into a short practice. So that relates to that research, maybe, if that would work. Laura, do you want to start?
Maybe I will add one thing here. So your research, and from out of your research where you spend a lot of time, but do you feel like sometimes naturally you middle of 3 a.m, you wake up and then see, oh, what I found in my research, this is the right time to apply 3 a.m. when you have a hard time to sleep. So applying your own findings in 3 a.m. when you're struggling with the breath.
Great. Laura, do you want to give Sadbir the title? What? I didn't get your body language. It seems that you were saying.
You're
Sadbir,
like, do you want to start? I'm like, no, I don't want to start.
So Sadbir,
no jokes about. I'm happy to start, but I think in this particular realm, and when it comes to research experience, Sadbir is without any doubt the much more experienced and senior person here. So I would love to hand it over to Sadbir, and then I also happy to give my contribution afterwards.
Yeah, I think the practices and the research really go hand in hand. The purpose of the research is really to test the efficacy of these in controlled conditions, to really have an objective outcome that we can then report and publish and share with other scientists as well as the general population. And personally, I do practice some of the practices that I have done studies with. So that does happen personally because occasionally I do have bouts of insomnia, and so it is helpful to do these practices. And there is a translation of living this. One of the other things is the reverse of that, which is something that I experience when I'm lecturing, because I'll give a lecture on the mechanisms underlying yoga and show the research evidence base supporting all of that. And Laura's heading up a chapter in the Principles and Practice of Yoga and Healthcare on the psychophysiology of yoga. And in that, I explain and summarize in a logic model how all of the different elements of yoga practice, the postures, the breathing, the relaxation, and the meditation all have supporting evidence, and how they all work towards generating this state of relaxation and the state of contemplative experiences. And what happens when I lecture is that a lot of the comments of people coming afterwards is they're saying, I've been practicing yoga, but now I want to practice more. And people who have never practiced say, I'm going to start practicing yoga. It's as though the science is now, they finally needed some science to actually give them a kick in the rear to get them started again. And so there is that reverse end of things as well, that now that I've seen the evidence, hey, this stuff is really real. So now I'm going to, really emphasize that desire and action in practicing yoga.
Great. And did you want to say something specific about some specific practice, maybe related to breath, and then guide us into a breathing practice?
Sure. I mean, I can do that. We did a study that was done with the Benson Henry Institute. It was an NIH grant. It was looking at the mechanisms of yoga practice. And the home intervention that we did was a breathing meditation for stress out of the Kundalini Yoga tradition. And this was something that we chose that was specifically taught as being relevant for reducing stress. And it was also something that people who are unexperienced in any kind of physical yoga practices could easily engage in. And so it was actually called anti-stress breathing. And so I'm going to share my screen just to show you the mudra, because there's a hand mudra involved in the posture. So you're sitting comfortably, and the three fingers of the hand are together and pointing forwards, and then the fingertips of the thumbs and the pinky fingers are touching. And this is just held at the heart center, like so. So from the angle, it's looking like this, and you can see this in the drawing here. So you hold your hands in that posture. It's simple to hold. There's not much effort in holding it. And the breathing pattern is what is really the effective thing here. And what you do is you inhale through the nose slowly, and then you exhale through the mouth. And then you inhale through the mouth, and then exhale through the nose. So at the end of the inhale, you switch from nose to mouth or mouth to nose. Your eyes are focused downwards towards the tip of the nose, and you're holding this particular mudra. And you're trying to breathe as slowly and comfortably as you can. So inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, inhale through the mouth, exhale through the nose. So switching at the end of the inhale to mouth or nose. And if we were able to spend more time in person, we would be emphasizing the abdominal type of yogic breathing, in which the abdomen is moving out the belly. It's often called belly breathing. The beginning of the inhale, the abdomen comes out, then the chest fills up. And then you do the reverse, the chest collapses, and then you pull in lightly on the abdomen to finish the exhale. And that makes the breath move the entire torso. So you're really doing a full body breathing as opposed to just a shallow chest breathing. And then the most important aspect really is the slowness of the breath. The slower the breath is, the more powerful the exercise is. And what we're finding from the research is slow breathing has enormous impact on both the body and the mind. We're changing cardiovascular regulation, heart rate variability. We're changing efficiency of the breathing in a positive way. And we're making changes in both autonomic and central nervous system functioning. It can regulate pain, it can regulate emotion. And so the slower you breathe, the more powerful the exercise is. And typically we like to get down to the range of 4 to 6 breaths per minute. And then what you add to that is the mental focus. So you're focusing at the tip of the nose. If the mind wanders, you bring it back to that focal point. That's your center. That's your meditative aspect to the practice. And so together, the meditative component, the focus of attention, together with the slowness of the breath and the pattern, is generating this very powerful effect. And slow breathing with meditation is really encompassing a very strong part of the whole practice of yoga. And of course, there are traditions that are dedicated to meditation alone, and there's actually traditions dedicated to breathing practices alone. So both of them have powerful effects. So you bring them together, it's not a surprise that it's a very powerful experience. So just to keep your focus, because the mind will intrude, mind wandering intrudes during meditation. That is normal. And the task in meditation is to simply patiently bring the focus back. So now let's end by inhaling deeply. Hold the breath. And then slowly exhale, let the breath relax. You can release the mudra, relax the hands, and just let the breath relax. And just be aware of the subtleties that may have changed the experience in your body, the experience in your mind. And when you're ready, you can reopen your eyes. So that's a simple technique. In the intervention we did in the study, we had a number of so-called loosening exercises, chair exercises, flexibility of the spine, shoulder shrugs, neck rolls, that kind of thing. And then 11 minutes of that particular practice. And the participants were to do it every day. And that's typical of the kind of interventions we do in research in yoga in the West, is we provide a 15, 20-minute daily home practice. And that's together with perhaps a weekly 1-hour group yoga session or private yoga session.
Thank you, Sabir.
Any role in the mudra in the breathing?
So these are open questions. I mean, this is what we do in yoga. We get taught by different masters and different yoga lineages who say, do this mantra, do this mudra. And, we can ask them, what does this mudra do? But oftentimes we can't understand the answer.
Because as far as the finding is concerned, do you think if you don't do the mudra, the finding will be the same?
Well, this is a question we need to ask. I mean, in all these practices, I can say that this is the practice that we were taught, that it's inhaling breath, exhaling through the nose, that there's a mudra. Well, is that better than just simply sitting still and doing long, slow, deep breathing through the nose? Well, we need to investigate that. And one of the problems with investigating that is that long, slow, deep breathing itself with meditation is very powerful. So you'd need a very large sample size to distinguish any kind of superiority of the mudra and the mantra together with. So these are questions that need to be asked in yoga research.
Thank you. And Sadbir, just to make sure, is in the mudra, were there 2 sets of fingers touching or 3 sets of fingers touching?
So the 3 fingers in the middle of the hand were touching and pointing forward. Okay. And then the pinky finger and the thumb were the only ones that were touching. And then both fingers are pointing forward like so.
Okay, great. And then the other question I had, and this I see a lot in Kundalini yoga practices. You say, do this for 11 minutes, for example.
Yes. So that's another aspect, not only of our tradition, but many other yoga traditions. There are magic numbers, so to speak. Another magic number is 108. And so, we can ask these yoga masters, why 11 minutes? And again, my experience when I've asked my teacher, he talks in language that I can't understand. He talks about this energy, this chakra, that chakra, the kundalini here, nadis here. And, I might as well not have asked because I can't understand. So you take these things on faith, and you take them on faith because you've experienced all the other practices and they've made enormous changes in your life. So you do them. But the research side of actually, narrowing down what are these techniques and what are these mudras and what's the difference between mantras is an area that we still need to get to in yoga research.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that goes back to the typical research mind of, is there an active ingredient or is it, the whole thing.
Right, and that leads us to so-called dismantling studies. Taking it apart. Let's have one person do just the mudra, and another person do just the breath, and another person do just slow breathing without anything, and then compare the three and see what are the active elements, and then let's have a placebo mudra, make up a mudra, and see if there's a difference. And so, for example, there's studies on Om chanting. That's a big thing in yoga practices in India of chanting Om. Well, they've published those studies, but is that any different than chanting something else? And, so that kind of research still has to be done.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Sadhbir. That was great. Laura, maybe something about some of the research, and if you want to include a practice to any of things that you have used.
Sure. So a couple of things that I was just thinking about, to share more of a general nature. So yes, I have done a small amount, but some of that kind of dismantling research that Sadhbir was talking about, specifically at UCSD. And I think I mentioned that in our in the last dialogue that I was a part of as well, where we compared groups of university students, and one of the groups was given a movement and breath practice, and the second group was given just the breathing practice, where the breath was matched as closely as possible to the breath that was used during the movement practice. And what we found is that while in both groups there were significant reductions in cortisol and in self-reported stress, that only the group who did the breathing alone showed significant improvements in a specific visual attention task that we showed. So that was, that was one of the examples of studies that, get at those, like which part of the ingredient, so to speak, has a specific effect on a specific outcome measure. As far as, specific aspects of the breath or breathing techniques goes, one of the things that I love to emphasize, both in the studies or in the group classes, but even more so in individual work that I do with clients, is that, sure, there is the daily practice of 15 minutes, half an hour, where we particularly bring focus to the slow breathing, etc. But really get them to understand that it's not necessarily those 15 minutes a day that make the difference in the long run, but it is being able to slowly over time default to that kind of breathing in their daily life, which really then makes the difference. So it's not just doing your slow breathing practice for 15 minutes in the morning and then go about your day in your usual, head-driven, sympathetic manner. But because you come back to it every day, then hopefully the goal is eventually when you walking your dog, or when you're emptying the dishwasher, or when you have a conflict with somebody, that slowly you start, or when you're driving, or when you're stuck in traffic, or when you listen to a lecture in the case of students, that you find yourself reverting back to a slow and rhythmic breathing pattern where you consciously draw the breath all the way down into your belly, as opposed to just have a shallow chest breathing over and over again, and that it becomes integrated and interweaved in your daily life. And that's when I feel the real changes occur. And, beautiful testimony sometimes of students also, that all of a sudden they, become aware of, oh, I realized I was sitting in class, and all of a sudden I was aware of the fact that I'm barely breathing to keep myself alive. And prior to bringing the awareness to the breath every day, very specifically for those 15 minutes, that awareness wouldn't have been there. So that's, I think, where really the big changes occur. When the patterns that we practice on the mat, on the cushion, whatever the practice ground is, when they trickle into the rest of the daily life. And as far as specific breathing techniques go, of course, there is myriads thereof, and different ratios, and different, very specific ways in which we can breathe. But a very, very simple one that I find very effective especially people who experience high levels of anxiety or have trouble sleeping as well. So it's a good one to do in the evening. Oftentimes, actually, I instruct to do it lying down, but sitting is as well. And it's super simple. And the way, and we can try it just for a short moment, it's basically just having a quote unquote regular inhalation and then slowly and gradually extend the exhalation. So what we'll do, we'll inhale and then let's exhale for a count of 4 to start with for 3 times. Then we inhale, exhale for a count of 5, and then inhale and exhale for a count of 6 with 3 times each.
And is it inhalation through the nose and exhalation through the mouth?
In this case, let's always, both inhalation and exhalation are through the nose. And also, as Satbir already instructed earlier, try to feel, without trying to force it in any way, but when you inhale, try to get the breath to come all the way down into your belly. And when you start the exhale, begin by drawing the lower belly in toward the spine. So we'll find a comfortable seated position and ground down through our sitting bones, extend the crown of the head up so we have a nice and elongated spine. Eyes can be closed or open, directed to a point in front of you. And then just have a soft inhale. And then exhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then inhale. And exhale for 4. I'm not going to count this time, just inhale. And exhale for 4. Beautiful. Now let's move to an exhale of 5. So inhale again. Breath into the belly. And exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale. And exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale. And exhale. Let's do 3 more breaths with an exhale count of 6. So inhale. And exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inhale. And exhale. One more inhale. And exhale. Beautiful. And then for a couple of breaths, just revert back to your regular rhythm of inhalations and exhalations. And then slowly open your eyes. And again, just a tiny little taste of very simple practice that obviously also depending on each individual, the ratios might differ. You know, for one person, this already an exhale of 6 might feel very long, and more advanced practitioner might start with a count of 6 and then extend it even more. So the actual counts are vary individually, but just as a concept, a gradual exhalation extension practice is typically something that is experienced as very soothing, and that can reduce levels of anxiety, agitation, and help with bringing the nervous system more and more toward a parasympathetic dominance.
Thank you. Yes, Rinpoche.
Yeah. So what I felt, I understand is what Sadhvir was doing and what Laura doing kind of very similar in terms of the deep breathing from belly, and not shallow, trying to, most of the time I always joke saying we breathe like if the air is so expensive and I cannot afford it. So, so it's taking, knowing it's free and you can take your time and breathe as deep as possible. So the Laura's point was with the numbers were the same as Sadhvir is saying, the deep breathing is as deep, as slow as possible. It's a better. So slow, going toward the slowness is some sense, it's a different people. Sometimes people don't have a ability to breathe well in a physical condition. So it's like the numbers are more inviting toward that slow breathing, right? Is that my understanding correct?
Yes. And, on a very basic level, I think, as complex as our nervous system is, on a very foundational level, one of the main functions of the nervous system is to constantly assess whether we're safe or whether there's any danger inside or outside of us that we need to react to. And when we breathe deeply, and I know I'm simplifying here, but when we breathe in a slow and rhythmic manner with deep belly breath, what our nervous system interprets is that, as a sense of safety, we must be safe. There must be nothing, if we had to run away from something, or if we were scared, or if there was any like imminent thing that is dangerous, that's threatening an environment, we probably wouldn't have time or to breathe that deeply. And so by doing that, it sends our nervous system the signal that we're safe, and from that place, that's when restoration, healing is much more possible.
Yeah. So maybe also I think one way to look at this could be the other way around, because when we are feeling unsafe, we shorten our breath. And when we shorten our breath, in many yogic traditions is that when you breathe in through your nostril, the breath should reach below the navel, because below the navel is the energy center, where what we call is the wind. The energy of the wind is there. So whatever you wanted to do in terms of the breathing exercise, the energy, clearing energy or cultivating energy, that somehow you have to reach the source of the wind element in order to use the wind element to do whatever you're trying to do. So when you're fearful, you're not breathing enough to reach that location. Mm-hmm. So I guess many practices, it's very common in Tibetan tradition that either it's a syllable breathing, the light breathing, or tiglet breathing, you name it, many breathing, they always have to go down below the navel. Mm-hmm. So because you cannot do halfway, so somehow, even though there's a reason why syllable, not tiglet is bindus, or why bindus, not just the light. So there is a reason why these different images plays different role. But one thing in common, all of them has to go all the way down below the navel. So I think that kind of explains why slow breathing or deep breathing and belly breathing, they all kind of comes together. And I personally, when I'm at 3 a.m, whatever reason, when I wanted to, just calm down, go to bed to sleep, I do that all the time. And it's just always so helpful to not necessarily doing all this complex visualization, just simply breathing, make sure the breath goes below the navel, and that combines together with the slow breathing.
Yeah. Thank you, Rinpoche. Yeah, and as you have taught, and in the Tibetan tradition also, there's a sense, what I remember there's a sense of counting, but not counting in that way. They seem not to want to get kind of analytical, but there is something that, you tap each knee as you're holding, right? There's a sense of course, some people can cheat and go too fast, but there's a sense of also extending that holding, and that supports breathing, whether it's a specific practice like Tumo, but even in other practices, just to hold the breath longer. Is that right, Rinpoche? Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to move for these last few minutes into the area of yoga therapy. So, we have found, when I say we now, I talk about the research community has found so many benefits in yoga. And as Laura was also saying, sometimes, how do we put it in clinical, and said, but also sometimes we kind of, untangle them to say, what is this specific practice? Now, if you can tell us and the audience a little bit more about the birth of yoga therapy specifically, and how it uses these yoga techniques for an individual way of healing and so forth. So whoever wants to start.
Sure, I'll go ahead with that. And historically, yoga was not a form of medicine. It was a spiritual practice whose goal was the samadhi state, the achievement of these contemplative states. And because yoga works on multiple different aspects of human functioning, through postures, through breath, through relaxation, and through meditation, we're affecting many psychophysiological functions. And so the rationale is very clear. If we can improve the functioning of underlying psychophysiological mechanisms, we're going to be able to restore the dysfunctionality that's responsible for medical and psychological conditions. So that's the rationale. It's a very strong rationale. And one of the ideas of yoga practice is that you're optimizing performance. And so, yoga therapy of applying yoga to patient populations is really no different. You're optimizing their psychophysiology to bring them from pathophysiology to normal physiology. Now, as I said, this historically was not part of yoga practice. Ayurveda was more of a clinical tradition, but yoga was a practice. So we see the first evidence of the application of yoga, or the first documented evidence of yoga as a therapeutic intervention, at the beginning of the 20th century, in the 1920s, typically mostly in Mumbai, where a couple of yoga masters were applying this. And then it became very popular in India. In fact, there were yoga clinics, and yoga was being applied as a therapy. In 1963, the Indian government commissioned a book called Yogic Therapy. And that was the first book. And then now it's grown dramatically, and it's not only been throughout India, it's come to the West just like yoga came to the West. And so now we have a whole movement around yoga therapy. We have the International Association of Yoga Therapists, whose goal is really to represent the value of yoga as a therapeutic intervention in modern medicine. And so that's really the history, and the rationale is really sound. Not only can we restore pathophysiological circumstances to normal physiology, we can actually prevent disease, because a lot of the risk factors for disease are basically poor lifestyle behavior. That's the biggest burden in modern medicine, is the so-called non-communicable lifestyle diseases. Just to give you an example, the biggest risk factor for developing depression is chronic stress. And we know from the research that one of the things that yoga is absolutely fantastic at, and virtually every study that's looked at yoga in terms of its ability to manage stress has shown positive benefit. So here you have the understanding and the mechanism by how yoga can prevent, dysfunctional mood states such as depression. And in fact, there's now good evidence that using these practices can actually reduce depression in patients with clinically significant depression. So that's how we've come here. And in yoga research, it's actually easier to get a clinical trial funded for treatment of a disorder than it is to get basic research funded. So a lot of the research that's being done in yoga now is actually on clinical disorders.
Thank you. Laura, I wanted to go into that question too, but specifically going back to something that you mentioned, which is the sensation of feeling safe. And again, when I hear Sadbir talking about not just chronic stress, but depression, we feel unsafe, right? So, in terms of yoga therapy, what are ways of getting into this inner safe space?
Well, I think, the topic of today's dialogue, the breath is probably one of the most potent tools to do that. Once you get any system back to the foundation of a slow and rhythmic breathing pattern, that might not be the cure as such, but it allows to bring the system to a solid, I guess, foundation from which then restoration and healing is much more possible. And also linking to what Sadbir just said and the power of the healing potential of these practices, I think an additional aspect that differentiates yoga therapy and makes yoga therapy a very effective and powerful approach is the individual approach to a client. Now, while yoga can be very effective as in a group setting, no matter what the clinical condition is, whether it's a populations with low back pain or anxiety or depression, ultimately, when you have a group of 30 people in front of you, yes, there is general practices that will probably benefit all of them, like a slow and rhythmic breathing pattern. All of them will benefit to it to some extent. But each person is different. Each person has a different constitution. Each person has a different way in which their condition started, different contextual factors in their life that continue to, aggravate the symptoms. And so having the possibility of giving each person very specifically targeted, whether it's physical, asana postures, or the breathing patterns with very specific techniques and ratios and specifically targeted meditations. It's like, from a nutritionist perspective, there's general principles of, probably avoiding refined sugars, and it is good for everybody. But every person who goes to a dietitian will get a very specific prescription of a diet that's specifically targeted toward that person. And that's where I think, yoga therapy is very powerful. It makes it, challenging from a research perspective because it requires carefully designed case studies to show the efficacy and effectiveness on an individual level. But I mean, there's functional groups that can also be very, very, very powerful. But I think that's just that's oftentimes, from a definition also perspective, what differentiates yoga therapy from a more broadly considered, yoga class that you would go to.
Right. Thank you. And that's a great difference, but also it's important that, it's not only about research, right? It's about how it affects individual. And as you say, those are difficult to do research on, but yet very important to have as practices. Mm-hmm. So as we close today, anyone, Rinpoche, anything on closing remarks?
I don't have particularly any closing remark, but I think it was a wonderful session, and particularly, able to do some experiential practice was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sadbir, Laura?
So I think what I've dedicated my career towards is the research. And the reason that is important, I think, is that it provides the research evidence base. It provides the credibility towards these practices. And, people that practice yoga don't need a research study to tell them that they've just gone to a yoga class and had a great experience. People that are already practicing yoga are fine. What we're trying to reach is the bulk of the population that is not aware of the potential benefits of yoga practice, including the medical community, including education systems, including the workplace. And this research, provides the evidence and the credibility, and allows us to explain how yoga works, so that that rationale can then be used as a justification, together with the efficacy studies, to justify us bringing yoga into healthcare, bringing yoga into the public schools, and bringing yoga into the workplace. And that's the beauty of the research. It's in modern language of society, which is scientific language.
Thank you. And as you said, even for practitioners, sometimes hearing the yoga, it's kind of a extra humph, right? For
yes.
Come back to practice, get your butt back in the cushion, right? Or the mat. Great. Thank you. Laura?
I guess I just want to end with, a note of gratitude. I mean, I'm so grateful for the practice, just for what it has meant personally in my life. But here, as I'm sitting here and hear you all talking, I'm just thinking of, if it wasn't for the yoga practice, I wouldn't be here having this conversation. I wouldn't have met you, Ali, in the train going up to New York. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with Satbir. And so it's not just been such a beautiful and rich aspect, and continues to be in my life, but it's just given me opportunities professionally and personally, and it connected me to people that probably otherwise I wouldn't have met. So I'm grateful.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to just let you know, we don't have a date yet for the next, for the August dialogue, but it will come soon. But we do have a date for our conference at Serenity Ridge. It's going to be October 11th to the 16th, and it's the first time that we actually combine the retreat, the fall retreat by Rinpoche, with the conference. Satbir will be one of the speakers. We'll have Geshe Yongten, we'll have Lonnie Jared, and we'll have the Tibetan doctor Menpa Punzo Wamo. So more details to come, but just wanted to put it out there because it's going to be a very special retreat hosted at Serenity Ridge, our center of Ligmincha International, but also online. But hope you join us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.